about a third of the general public still thinks that Alzheimer's is not reversible. Probably in 10 years from now, everyone's saying, of course, Alzheimer's is preventable and treatable. Everyone knows that. So I want to get to that point where it's obvious to the world. The mission is to spread the word. And what I mean by reversal is to take someone who has Alzheimer's, who has dementia, someone who's not thinking clearly, emotionally, or reasoning properly, and give them their brain back, give them the normal faculties that they originally had.
My name's Krystal, and today I'm here to interview the host of this new podcast, Dr. Joshua Helman. He is a Harvard-trained physician licensed in 14 states. He has 2 degrees in biochemistry, a bachelor's from Harvard, and a master's from University of Cambridge. He is board certified by the American Board of Emergency Medicine and the American Board of Lifestyle Medicine. His medical degree is from Harvard Medical School and MIT. He is the former and current medical director of Hippocrates Health Institute and has worked at True North Health Center with a focus on fasting. He has worked in the Tampa, Florida area in a clinic for 6 years on reversing Alzheimer's dementia. He co-hosted a summit in the fall of 2023 called The Truth About Alzheimer's: How to Slow Aging and Prevent Alzheimer's. He is the Chief Medical Officer at the Alzheimer's Treatment Centers of America. Dr. Josh's interests include Alzheimer's disease, vitality, longevity, regeneration, toxins, mold, Lyme disease, energy medicine, and breath work. He is passionate about applying his biochemical knowledge to real-world challenges. As a plant-based physician, he embraces a functional approach, including the importance of diet and lifestyle for optimal health. Dr. Josh is inspired by his patients' abilities to change their bad habits and adopt a better lifestyle in order to improve and sometimes reverse chronic diseases. His own journey to better health took roughly 10 years, so he is sympathetic for patients who face setbacks, struggles, and challenges with their own health. In his free time, he likes to exercise, travel, and hike. Dr. Josh, I'm excited to talk to you today to learn more about your background and what your vision is for this podcast. So to get us started, would you mind sharing what inspired you to create this podcast and what's your personal connection to this mission?
Yeah, sure. So, this is very exciting. We finally have our own podcast specifically focused on Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's reversal. So a lot of pieces to unpack there, but Alzheimer's a very personal impact in my own life. As a teenager, I saw my grandmother devastated by Alzheimer's, but it wasn't just her and her generation. It was also, I saw how it affected my parents and that generation too, because they're thinking, wait, not only who's going to take care of grandma, but wait, in 20 or 30 years, this might happen to me if it can happen to her. And so as a teenager, definitely left an imprint that someday I want to do something to fix this. And then, as you mentioned, I worked in the Tampa area, actually reversing Alzheimer's. But what I found, and I lectured to the general public about this, about a third of the general public still thinks that Alzheimer's is not reversible. So that's why I just want to get the word out to as many people as possible. At the summit last year, we had 30,000 participants. So we're slowly getting the word out. But, and it's one of those things, probably in 10 years from now, everyone's saying, of course, Alzheimer's is preventable and treatable. Everyone knows that. So I want to get to that point where it's obvious to the world. But right now, it's anything but. What we're talking about now, unfortunately, is controversial, both from academics, but a third of the people at my lectures will be like, well, Dr. Josh, we know Alzheimer's isn't reversible, so there's something wrong with what you're saying.
Well, I'm glad you shared that because I thought if you could just share the meaning by reversing Alzheimer's. Is this scientific possibility or is this more of a hopeful goal?
This is the real world. This is established science. Dean Ornish earlier this year published a study, a randomized controlled study showing in patients with mild cognitive impairment that you could reverse the dementia. So this is not pie in the sky idea. And I personally have done it for hundreds of patients. So this is not theoretical. What is cutting edge is that very few people understand this or know about this yet. So again, the mission is to spread the word. And what I mean by reversal is to take someone who has Alzheimer's, who has dementia, someone who's not thinking clearly, emotionally, or reasoning properly, and give them their brain back, give them the normal faculties that they originally had.
Well, I'm excited to dive into this conversation today even deeper with you. But I thought let's start with your background. It spans emergency medicine, lifestyle medicine, and integrative health. How does this diverse expertise that you've accumulated over your career shape your approach to Alzheimer's and brain health?
Yeah, definitely. So a few thoughts. Number one, the brain is extremely complex. You're dealing with, trillions of connection between neurons. And the reality is, do we understand everything about the brain? Definitely not. Do we understand most things about the brain? I would argue that we do not. I mean, sure, we know anatomically these are different sections, but literally, I mean, look at any journal article or journal issue about the brain. I mean, there are still basic fundamental concepts and discoveries that are being made every single issue. So no, the brain is a super complicated organ, and for that reason, trying to understand what goes wrong and fix it it's very complicated. There are nuances to it. The exciting thing is we have enough tools, but I would argue you need to basically use dozens of tools to fix it because we know enough now that Alzheimer's has between 30 and 200 root causes in each case. And each case is going to be a little bit different. And for that reason, you need to focus on different deficiencies or problems or root causes in each case.
I feel like it might be an oversimplistic statement after what you've just responded, but even after what we find in the research and then you work with individuals it just points to more and more that no two brains are the same. They're all very unique and with their own unique challenges and demands or the care plans they need to support and essentially optimize the way they'd like to function.
100%. No two are alike, but just like if you've got muscle atrophy and because you're not exercising, if we get you back exercising, your muscles will come back. The same thing with the brain. You may be neglecting it, have high levels of toxins, infections, glucose dysregulation, so metabolic instability, trauma. The cool thing is if you fix all those things, you can reestablish normal brain function.
And from some of the areas of expertise that you've accumulated from your different areas of medicine, as well as in your practice, have focused on areas like neurotoxicity, fasting, plant-based medicine. How does this intersect with Alzheimer's prevention or management?
Yeah, I mean, to me, these are all tools. So, for example, I've got 2 degrees in biochemistry, and sure, those degrees were, 30, 40 years ago. They were a while ago. The cool thing is some of the basic information about how cells work, how DNA works, how proteins work, that hasn't changed. What has changed are some of the details. We now know which genes to target, which toxins are going to be the most disruptive to the brain function, and we can layer these approaches. But because we're dealing with such a nuanced, complicated system with so many underlying causes, I think you need someone like myself who has that background, who's not afraid to delve into different areas, who has enough depth and breadth in order to focus. And my plan for this podcast is to have interviewees from many different fields because we need all those fields together for an optimal results in terms of reversing and resetting Alzheimer's.
I know I've been grateful to be a part of this conversation and initiative with you with the idea that it is a very interdisciplinary approach. And even just thinking about the areas of expertise that you have, I'm not sure we talk neurotoxicity very frequently years ago, or the idea of fasting is definitely one that's come online more recently. And I would think too, even plant-based medicine was not mainstream tools that many people may have heard of.
Exactly right. And what's disturbing to me is, I mean, let's just take out of the air fasting. There are literally very few studies of fasting and brain function in humans. They're just not out there. So, but I worked in a fasting center for a few years, so I've actually seen what happens to brain function with fasting. So it's exciting. Much of my clinical research hasn't been published anywhere. And one of my goals for the podcast is to interview experts in those fields and to get maybe some unpublished perspective too. Because to my mind, you don't have to use just double-blind, placebo-controlled, large-scale studies, even though those are really good. But to my mind, if you have someone with Alzheimer's, we don't have another 10 or 20 or 30 years until some of these concepts are settled science. You need to take the existing information and try to layer on the best approach. For example, use a drug that may not be fully FDA approved, but the FDA has approved it for compassionate use. It's like, and then give people the choice. Like, I think the risks outweigh the benefits, but let's see. I'm sorry, I think the benefits outweigh the risk, but let's see if patients and their families agree.
So that aligns with a lot of my training when I was working with a clinical psychologist years ago with the idea of early memory loss groups and clubs. And can we teach people with early stage neurodegenerative disease about lifestyle and things that they can do? It was controversial then. I suspect many people tuning in, that sounds like this would have been a normal conversation, but in finding the balance, by the times we have random controlled trials and things we like, it can be 10 to 15 years. And for people in the trenches, yourself like a clinician, other people like us on the education side, we are trying to support individuals now. So what are the best science-informed or evidence-based recommendations we can tell them about, like you shared, and then let them make a decision on what that can look like for their care.
Right. And to be fair, I'm not against, and I think we need bench work, basic research. We need large clinical studies. We need all those things and plan to have experts on the podcast in all those areas. But the reality is there are people out there right now as we speak who have Alzheimer's, and they need to do something because the natural course of this disease often is a quick path every week, every month, getting worse and worse. So yeah, there's an urgency here, and again, I think because we're dealing with over 6 million people in this country with Alzheimer's, and I feel like the numbers are going up, that we need to get this information out there.
And I know that's the vision for the first season for many people tuning in. We're going to dive into the different elements of lifestyle, but I'd like to give you the chance because you mentioned on some of them, but how big is this lifestyle factor in the idea of the prevention and management of Alzheimer's disease based on your training as well as your clinical experience supporting individuals living with Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so that's what's really exciting is that lifestyle, we now know, has a huge role in reversing Alzheimer's. And just so the audience understands what we mean by lifestyle, yeah, we don't mean like, going out to the beach. I mean, nothing wrong with going out to the beach every day, but what we're talking about here is, number one, eating foods that promote health. Specifically, my bias is against adding salt, oil, and sugar, and we could do many episodes just on that. And then getting enough exercise, getting enough deep sleep, decreasing stress levels, and having a sense of community, and also cutting out toxins, whether it's alcohol or smoking or some of the drugs that we know can hurt the brain, including antihistamines. And I'm sure we'll talk about that too.
I recognize that may sound overwhelming for people when they hear all the different aspects of lifestyle, but if they actually may take a moment and reflect on what you just shared, many of these elements are things we do every day. We're making decisions about our nutrition, our hydration, the way we're cleaning our immediate environments, how we're moving our bodies, engaging our brains, like tuning in to learn something new with us on this chat. But I think it's achievable for a lot of folks to realize that there are still these ones where we can have wins. There's better gains we can have. I think probably one of the most common ones people know is the sleep. When you're not sleeping well, that this can be an issue for our health. But what that means in the terms of neurodegenerative space is we're learning a lot more how these are supportive tools and strategies.
Right. And we don't want anyone here feeling overwhelmed when we talk about this. So don't think that you have to do everything correct all at once as soon as you finish listening to this recording. What I mean is, maybe once every week or once every month, whatever works into your schedule, is pick one thing that you've heard from us or a similar lecture on lifestyle and then implement it. Because it's going to be, I think, a lot easier to make gradual changes than think, oh, I'm going to have to stop everything completely that I'm doing and then start over again. And, there's some people who do that. I just find most people, they gradually add an additional thing to what they're doing.
And I think it will be a nice invitation for the upcoming guest where we can get more of this specialized area on just one aspect of lifestyle to better make those decisions or information for ourselves. And wondering now we've kind of covered these big bucket areas, if you can pull this together for us, could you share a case study or an example of someone who has been impacted by Alzheimer's disease and how these integrative lifestyle approaches has supported their day-to-day functioning?
Oh, sure. I'll pick a patient I know or a guest I know. Her name happens to be Susan. I met her at Hippocrates, where I'm the medical director. It's a raw vegan retreat. She basically was diagnosed with Alzheimer's a couple years ago. And the first thing that she did was she implemented the lifestyle changes she learned at Hippocrates. Basically, what we just talked about. She cut out a lot of the animal products and is eating basically a lot of vegetables, some fruits, and cut down on salt and added sugar to her diet. That improved her cognitive thinking. She also improved her exercise and got better sleep and saw some improvement with those changes. The next thing that she did is because her mentation, her thinking was not back up to where it had been, is that we tried a brand new FDA approved drug for compassionate use that decreases inflammation in the brain and elsewhere. And it's given intravenously over 6 doses over 6 months. And the good news is after the first dose, she had dramatic improvement to the point, like I asked her to do something to fill out some paperwork. The first time I asked her to do it, she didn't do it. I gave her the IV drug, and after that, boom, she did it. It wasn't just my memory's better, her testing was better, but I could physically see she carried out the task that I gave her. So that's one specific example that just off my head. And I got to tell you, I'm really excited because this shows that it's not just this amazing drug, which we didn't see any side effects in her, and I haven't seen any yet, which is great news. But we're not looking for a magic bullet that's going to fix everything because there's so many root causes. To my mind, this FDA-approved drug for compassionate use, what it does is it decreases inflammation. But if you don't go after the root causes with the lifestyle changes, I don't think you're reversing it. I think it's a Band-Aid. So to me, it's exciting to see this in action, bringing it all together.
And you mentioned action there. So I just would like to highlight for people that might be tuning in the idea that if you're living with a neurodegenerative disease, which is typically progressive in nature, how does behavior change look? Or how is behavior change then being achieved? If you might want to share just some insights on that to balance the conversation for us.
I can try. So when you say behavior, do you mean eating the wrong foods or using or smoking? Like what do you mean by behavior in this
Sure.
context?
I'm thinking behavior or just the ability that they can make the lifestyle changes and take those day-to-day actions and behaviors. Because for many people, we're thinking if you're neurodegenerative and it's progressive, almost, I hate to say this, but it's been the feedback, why bother? Where it's actually, they're still in a lot of control of the decisions they make and then being able to get those behavioral supports. What have you seen in your practice?
Yeah, what I've seen is the people who are successful are tied into a community. In Susan's case, it was a residential community, Hippocrates living there for several weeks. Or now with technology, you can create your own community, an online community with other people you meet on a regular basis, say through Zoom or other technologies. But I think the key concept to improve your odds is to do this with other people, either in person or virtually. If you're part of a family, try to get the whole family to exercise and eat the right way and get adequate sleep together. It's just much more reinforcing, and I think a lot easier. I mean, I think like when I like to go do a cold plunge, I find it a lot easier to jump into cold water if there are other people around me and I can talk to them about it, as opposed to being all by myself. And I'm like, this is nuts. I'm getting out of this cold water.
I appreciate what you've shared, even for yourself, is to realize behavior change for everyone can look a little bit different and have its own challenges. And I think back to kind of one of the mantras that used to be about health. Like, if you want to get healthier, find the healthiest person you know and spend as much time as you can with them, with the idea that their habits start to rub off on you, or you start to see that what they're eating, and you may choose then similar foods, but it is this idea that it does play out to all types of communities for us, and that social support is very important for change.
Yeah, and the reality is, the average American is eating processed food, is not healthy. 93% of Americans are not optimally metabolically healthy. So if you're going to be in that 7% that's optimal, you're probably going to look a little bit different than the average American. And the reality is just the way we're social creatures. If you're doing things that are very different than the other people in your social sphere, you might get a lot of pressure and pushing. And I would say push back, try to bring some of those people with you. But if you can't, don't be afraid to sever some ties and create new ones for your own health and well-being.
I think there's more that just keeps coming out around how important that social health is in the overall picture of health: behavioral, mental, physical, emotional. But social really can be a good influencer that helps sets us up for success. I'm curious if we can dig deeper into where we're going to go on the podcast. What role do you think this podcast can play in bridging the gap between science and the personal care strategies for Alzheimer's disease?
I think actually, because we're just creating it now as we're speaking, that we don't know what this is going to turn into. We're gonna listen to feedback. It could be that our viewers are going to want interactive Q&A at one point, and you know what? I'm happy to turn this into an interactive episode. But that's the exciting thing with launching on new ventures, is you don't know what the ultimate part is going to be, and that's frankly part of the adventure. Is I'm just putting it out there. We're putting it out there that we want to be part of the mission to reverse Alzheimer's and get information about that out there. But the reality, with the way technology is advancing, who knows, 3 months, 6 months, a year from now, there may be, with artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc., there may be, avatars, other things that we can include on our podcast in order to get the message out in as many ways as possible to people, to basically get the message out how people want to watch it or listen to it, or whatever the next modality is.
I'm so glad you shared the invitation for audience. So if they're tuning in, to be sure to reach out or leave a review on what are the areas of interest to them. What do they want to know more about? Because even though we're both approaching the conversation from our own backgrounds and discipline, the science comes out every day and it is moving fast and quick, but it's also being able to translate that into the actionable steps that people can take in their healthcare, but also to be an educated, informed consumer as well.
Right. And also to push the envelope, because the sad reality is today, if you're someone or you have a family member with Alzheimer's and you go to your primary doctor or even your neurologist, they are not necessarily going to give you all the different options that are available. You need to be a smart consumer of healthcare. But the good news is there's so much information out there, and now that's going to include our podcast.
Yeah, and I think it's important information to have. I think back to my own family's journey and interactions they have with providers in this cognitive health space. And depending who you ask, sometimes you get a different answer. And you do have to almost do a little bit of homework on your end, but to let people, I think, rest assured that there are people that have this expertise, that have trained across different disciplines, that really can help support you or give you a different view on your health to pull things together for what it is you're striving to achieve for your overall health and well-being.
Yeah, and let me give like 3 specific examples of cutting edge technologies I'm using today in the clinics I work in to reverse Alzheimer's that most people, even many of the experts in Alzheimer's, haven't even heard of and are not doing with their patients today. The first one I mentioned, an intravenous drug that Susan got that is FDA approved for compassionate use to reverse or to decrease inflammation by decreasing what's called galectin-3, which is one lectins inside of us that causes inflammation. That's number one. Number two is an intravenous exosomes, which are like stem cells without the cells, that they're not alive. They're a collection of over 500 different growth factors that can help regenerate the brain. And then the third technology has actually been out for over 50 years, but it's now being applied to Alzheimer's, and that's called total plasma exchange. It's one of the ways to filter out toxins from the blood, and there's some early research suggesting that it can decrease amyloid plaque in the brains of Alzheimer's patients. So I'm just giving you an example of 3 new cutting edge technologies that you're probably not going to read if you do a quick Google search of new treatments for Alzheimer's. But I'm telling you, I'm using it successfully in my clinics today. And I just want people to know that there are many options out there. Don't go with the first opinion. Just like, if you're shopping for a house, you probably wouldn't buy the first house you look at. So please ask questions, get more than one opinion for something so important as a disease like Alzheimer's.
And the technologies you shared are going to be something I think many of us are going to learn more about together as we grow our audience. And I'm so glad you kind of shared insights on what listeners can expect on the different types of conversations we're going to have. I want to make sure, though, I give you a chance to say, are there any common misconceptions about Alzheimer's disease that we're going to address in this podcast?
Yeah, I think we're going to cover just the basic concept that not all cases of dementia are Alzheimer's and vice versa. Alzheimer's happens to be the most common cause of dementia of adults in this country. About 70% of dementia cases in adults are Alzheimer's. But even within Alzheimer's, you've got these 30 to 200 root causes that are different percentages. So just like not all cancers are the same, not every case of Alzheimer's is the same. And I know people are looking for simplicity, easy approaches. And I think one of the messages that we need to get out there is that this is complicated. Every case is different. Every person is unique. And you need a care team making plans with you, not saying this is your only choice, do this or nothing. And so that everyone ends up feeling good about it. There's a team approach and you get a good result.
And what a welcome invitation, I think, for many people that are navigating even their own health journey, if they're supporting someone with a neurodegenerative disease, or if they themselves are starting to notice some changes in their cognitive health, to know about the importance of that disciplinary team and questions they can ask, new experts or new disciplines that they might not have on their team that might be able to give them good insights. So I'm excited to see what we will cover in this first season. I want to make sure I ask you, though, you gave us some of those cutting edge technologies. And Dr. Josh, as you're thinking about launching this podcast, what has you the most excited in the field?
Yeah, wow, where to start? I've got a list of potential people that I want here, but to me, it's the unknown. I mentioned the three cutting edge technologies that I'm using today. I want that fourth or that fifth. So that's the truth is I want to learn just as much as you and everyone else by doing this podcast. And I felt I got that when I did the podcast last year. We interviewed 40 of the world's experts on Alzheimer's, and I feel like I'm an expert now just by learning at the feet of all these amazing experts. So hard to answer, but I'm really excited about this.
I think that's a nice invitation because for so many people, if we heard the unknown, we tend to get a stress response or a little bit of the anxiety, but this just might be that threshold where it's the good anxiety that makes us more alert, wants us to tune in, pay attention and focus on something and learn something new for ourselves, our own health, or our loved ones that we support. So Dr. Josh, we're winding down the intro conversation for people to get to know you. I'd like to ask a few questions where maybe they can get some takeaways from you.
Sure.
Is there one book or seminal research that shifted your thinking on the idea of preventing Alzheimer's?
I wouldn't say book. There's one concept, and that is the concept of biofilm or biologic film. And there's no magic book that comes to mind. Biofilm was a concept that I learned about actually 35 years ago in my basic biochemistry training. We know that bugs create and cancer cells create a biofilm around themselves in order to protect themselves from the body's immune system. So I would say research the area of biofilm. But if you're looking for a book, Heather Sanderson's book, Reversing Alzheimer's, it just came out. It's a New York Times bestseller. That if I had to pick one book, it would be Heather Sanderson's book.
I always like to give people some extra resources if they want to continue now that we've piqued their interest.
Well, and especially at the end of the book, there's a whole set of resources and next steps. So it's almost like they used to have something called like the yellow pages. Well, that's kind of what it's like.
Well, and I feel that's always good is when you can read and then know where to go next. Or luckily, like if people are tuning in, here's some other resources if you want that deeper dive. I want to know, Dr. Josh, and ask you a personal question because you're your own health and wellness expert. You know your body best. What's your one non-negotiable for taking care of your own brain?
Yeah, it's exercise. Even though I don't like waking up early and exercising, but I know that if I do that, I'm going to feel really good afterwards. And I know when I exercise, I'm going to be creating new neurons, new synaptic connections in the brain through BDNF and other growth factors. So to me, exercise is a non-negotiable.
I appreciate you sharing your own priority of brain health. Now that our listeners have had a chance to get to know you, if they want to know more, where can they find you and your work?
Yeah, probably the easiest way is through my website, which is just drjosh.com, drjosh.com. And then also on social media, I'm at GreenBrainsMD, Green Brains with an S, MD. So those are two places they can find me.
And our listeners can find all those links live below in the show notes, wherever they're tuning in for their podcast. I want to make sure you have the final message. What do you want our listeners to know who will be tuning in or about the idea of reversing Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so my message is that Alzheimer's is preventable, it's reversible, and it's in your hands. We are creating this podcast as one tool, one weapon in your armamentarium in order to fight this devastating, awful disease. So please listen to our podcast, share it, and provide us feedback, what we're doing great, and frankly, what we're missing on and what we can do better.
As we wrap up this inaugural episode, we hope you've gained a deeper understanding of the mission driving this series to explore meaningful science-based strategies for managing and potentially reversing Alzheimer's disease. The journey to reversing Alzheimer's is one of hope, curiosity, science, and collaboration. And Dr. Josh at the helm, we're poised to bring meaningful conversations to the forefront. Be sure to join us in future episodes as we dive into groundbreaking research, inspiring case stories, and actionable advice from experts across diverse fields. Together, we're going to step into the unknown and uncover some of the innovations shaping the future of Alzheimer's care. Thank you for listening and investing your time and energy in learning more about ways to reversing Alzheimer's. We hope you continue this journey with us.
Thanks, Krystal.